Hello, I'm Professor Brian Cox. Welcome to People of Science. Professor Martin Rees, could you first describe who you are and what your research area is?
Yes, I'm an astronomer and cosmologist, and I've worked mainly in Cambridge University.
And who have you chosen as your person of science?
I've chosen Joseph Rotblat, who was a physicist. He was born in 1908, and he grew up in Poland. And before the war, he'd already established himself as a research scientist in nuclear physics, but was most famous really because he was a pioneer of addressing arms control. And I choose him because he really exemplifies for me a scientist with a social responsibility.
But I suppose he is defined and famous for his work in the Manhattan Project, and motivated in the main by a fear that the Germans would acquire the bomb first.
From the late 1930s, there were intimations that it might be possible to cause a runaway nuclear reaction that could lead to an explosion, which would be hugely more powerful than a chemical explosion. So the idea was that by putting a sufficiently large mass of some material like uranium that are radioactive together, you could trigger this explosion. The motivation for most people who went to Los Alamos was to get a bomb before Hitler did, because they knew very well that famous scientists like Heisenberg were there in Germany, and that's why it was valuable to deploy many of the greatest physicists of the era in Los Alamos. And Rotblat was there, but also Oppenheimer, Hans Bethe, and the young Richard Feynman was there as well. So they got the really best talent there to actually work out how these bombs should be made to work.
This is interesting here. This is a Nature article.
That's right. This is about 1939.
Yeah. On emission of neutrons accompanying the fission of uranium nuclei.
This is work that he must have done in Poland.
So this is some of the foundational theoretical work that would later be used to build a bomb.
Yes. But in fact, it's interesting that if you study literature on nuclear physics, there's a sudden blackout about 1941. And anyone who just followed literature would realise something was happening, because there were no papers from any well-known nuclear physicist.
Because they're
all gone to work at Los Alamos. Yeah.
Yes, on the Manhattan Project. It's interesting because throughout this series, at People of Science, we've had many Nobel Prize winners for science. But this is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So could you describe the process he went through after the war?
When it became clear that Hitler was not going to get a nuclear weapon, and that was clear by the end of 1944, then Rotblat had second thoughts, and he actually left the project prematurely. He became shocked by the dropping of the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and when he returned to England, he determined that he would devote himself to peaceful uses of nuclear physics and try to control the powers he had helped unleash, as it were. He organised conferences urging the abolition of nuclear weapons. And they had their first conference in a village called Pugwash in Nova Scotia. And that's why these conferences became known as Pugwash conferences. And these were important because scientists from the West and from the Soviet Union could get together.
And what I think is very inspiring in this case is it worked. So it's not just a group of idealists coming together and discussing things in an abstract sense. They actually did catalyse test ban treaties.
Yes, the partial test ban treaty in 1963 was definitely an outcome of these discussions, as also was the anti-ballistic missile treaty in the late 1960s. So these meetings had a genuine impact in pushing disarmament forward. And in 1995, the Nobel Prize was given half to the Pugwash organisation and half to Joe Rotblat personally. And in his speech, he said famously, "Above all, remember your humanity." And that was the guiding light throughout his long life.
It's interesting because you see today there's often pressure for scientists to be somehow pure, isn't there, and stay out of this dirty world of politics. And Rotblat really did not feel like that. Do you think we still have that spirit today?
Well, I think we should. I think it's fair to say that now there are many areas of science which have potential uses which are, on the one hand, hugely beneficial, but on the other hand, potentially catastrophic. And I think all scientists really need to follow the example of Joe Rotblat, who thought that scientists should sign a sort of Hippocratic oath.
Scientists, they should be aware of the role of science in society, and that in their career and their professional work they should not do anything in their work which could lead to harm to society.
He was the prime exemplar of a type of scientist who we ought to value more and who needs to be followed by others.